If there is one value Donald Trump has made it abundantly clear he treasures above all others, it is blind, unswerving, slobbering loyalty. He values it over competency and principles, over his own political party affiliation, over the rule of law. And Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche's tenure atop the Justice Department has been defined by exactly that. So now Donald Trump is rewarding him for it. Here's Trump yesterday.
Tomorrow, I'm instructing Dan and everybody else that's involved in that very complicated process, which is going to go, I think, very quickly, that we are going to make him permanent Attorney General.
Permanent Attorney General. If you're wondering how Todd Blanche, a man who actually surprisingly now faces an uphill Senate confirmation battle, secured Trump's vote to be nominated for the top job permanently, look no further than Todd Blanche's dogged pursuit of Donald Trump's agenda of retribution and the complete politicization of the Department of Justice. For Todd Blanche, that comes seemingly without any limits. And he's done it in the barely 2 months since Pam Bondi was fired and Blanche was appointed acting AG. Almost as soon as Blanche assumed that role, he hired Trump ally Joe diGenova. Joe diGenova was hired to breathe new life into an investigation into former CIA Director John Brennan. Donald Trump, of course, blames John Brennan for the intelligence community's investigation into Russia's interference in the 2016 presidential election. Todd Blanche led the effort to indict former director of the FBI, Jim Comey, a frequent target of Donald Trump's political attacks, for posting a photo of seashells. Todd Blanche approved an investigation into former Trump aide Cassidy Hutchinson. Hutchinson testified before the January 6th Select Committee about Donald Trump's role in stoking the events of January 6th. Todd Blanche also worked to vacate the seditious conspiracy convictions of members of the militia groups, the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, for the crimes committed during the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. What a record, right? But there's more. Todd Blanche also oversaw the criminal prosecution of the civil rights organization, the Southern Poverty Law Center. Todd Blanche fought tooth and nail to defend, to actually sell to Congress Donald Trump's pet $1.8 billion slush fund, even as members of Trump's own party balked at the potential of buckets of cash going to people who assaulted police officers and were convicted for doing so. Even today, Todd Blanche is giving Donald Trump one of his most highly desired prizes in his insatiable quest for revenge. Our colleagues Ken Dilanian and Carol Leonnig report that former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton has agreed to plead guilty to a single count of retaining classified information. John Bolton could face up to 5 years in prison and a $2.25 million fine. John Bolton had been facing potentially more years than that. And while it remains to be seen whether Todd Blanche can make it through the Senate confirmation process and be the full-fledged AG, something that just 14 months ago was a guarantee for any Trump nominee because of the willingness of Republicans to greenlight everything. Now it's at least a question. But no matter what happens next, the stain that Blanche's blind loyalty to Donald Trump has left on the Department of Justice will live forever. Todd Blanche not only undermines the Department of Justice in which he once served and now leads, but takes aim at federal judges as well.
These activist judges that they have a robe on, but they are more political, or certainly as political, as the most liberal governor or DA. And you can't forget that. You can't forget that. A judge doesn't get a special place simply because a robe is put on them. My guys, the men and women that work at the department stay up all night, get an appeal in, stayed, go back to the district court judge. Judge still wants to just do whatever he or she wants to do. We need you because it is a war, and it is something that we will not win unless we keep on fighting.
So war against those judges? And you should win. Why? Because you stay up all night? Unsurprisingly, earlier this week, federal judges publicly warned that attacks by people like that and elected officials have eroded Americans' confidence in our judicial system. Donald Trump's continued attempts to dismantle the Department of Justice as we know it, brick by brick, is where we begin today with former federal judge Michael Luttig. Also joining us, New York Times investigative reporter Mike Schmidt, plus former DHS chief of staff during Donald Trump's first term, Miles Taylor, is here. Let me deal with the one of the big stories of the day with you first, Mike. The news that the New York Times is reporting that John Bolton is expected to plead guilty to one count of retaining classified information. What do we know about how that came to be?
Look, the government had an enormous amount of leverage over Bolton in the sense that even if he went to trial, he lost, he could have faced decades in prison. And putting aside the merit of the case and whether it was brought as part of retribution and such, from Bolton's perspective, that was an incredibly risky thing to be confronting, of decades in prison. But by taking a plea deal, he will be essentially narrowing the amount of time he could potentially go to prison. Look, the Bolton case has always sort of stood out in the retribution bucket. It's clear that Donald Trump wanted John Bolton prosecuted. It's clear that he wanted all of this to happen. The issue in Bolton's case is that the case had been brought by career prosecutors, which had been different than some of the Comey and James cases, which had been brought by more politically appointed prosecutors. And on top of that, the indictment against Bolton, if you read it, had a fair amount of his own texts and messages and such that showed his, exchanging of classified information. And look, one of the biggest issues that Donald Trump has had in terms of retribution is that he was told during his first term that you should not talk about the government going after your enemies, because if the government eventually does do that, the public will not trust what the Justice Department is doing because they'll believe that the Justice Department is doing it at your behest. Obviously, Donald Trump had completely ignored that, but it leaves us in a position today of saying, okay, did John Bolton accept this plea agreement because indeed, the government had a legitimate case against him, or did he accept this plea agreement because the Justice Department went after him and this was the best, outcome that he could have for himself?
Miles, you argue that this had very little to do with the law. Explain.
Well, look, as far as classified information cases go, Nicole, we are talking about a candle flicker versus a wildfire. And by a candle flicker, I mean John Bolton is alleged to have kept private diaries. He is not alleged to have taken documents home with classified markings. Compare that, a man who kept private diaries to write a book. He's not alleged to have put a single piece of that classified information in his book. Compared to Donald Trump, who took hundreds of pages of classified documents intentionally out of the United States government, kept them for what prosecutors were apparently prepared to allege was for personal self-interested reasons, refused to hand them back over to the United States government, was charged with it, and had the case dropped. The Trump case is vastly bigger, and he wanted to come back into government and find similar cases against his enemies. That's why I say this is not a plea deal. This was a shakedown. Now, the reporting indicates that some of this began during the Biden administration, but by all appearances, the Biden administration pretty much let this one go. Then the Trump administration comes in, his top officials get briefed that there was an open case into John Bolton, and they apparently get very excited about it, from the CIA to the FBI. So, look, what I would say is this. Doesn't appear that this is actually about the law or professional judgment. At the end of the day, this is about revenge. And John Bolton said something when he first got charged. He referenced a quote, Nicole, that you've used on this program before, of the head of Joseph Stalin's secret police in Russia, which was, "You show me the man, I'll show you the crime." Do any of us really think it's a coincidence that a dozen people who have written books critical of Donald Trump have been threatened by him or put under investigation? It is no coincidence. They showed the man to the Department of Justice. They went and found the crime. And I think this is a much, much bigger story about the threats to democracy, because Trump's revenge tour, because of this success, is going to enter its next phase.
Well, Judge Luttig, I guess the next phase begins officially with Todd Blanche. I mean, Todd Blanche has overseen the attempts, the unsuccessful attempts to indict Jim Comey and the then successful one to indict him over the Seychelles. He's overseen and defended the attempt to settle with himself, with the IRS, is what a judge seemed to surmise. He went to Capitol Hill and had I think the legal term is chutzpah, to try to sell a slush fund for insurrectionists to Republicans who have a political boot on their throats because of Donald Trump's war with Iran and the ailing economy. I mean, Blanche is the attorney general that Donald Trump has been looking for since early 2017, when he was first reported by Mike and his colleagues in the New York Times to want Comey indicted.
Nicole, every word that Todd Blanche spoke on that replay at the beginning of your show was despicable and reprehensible. Prior to the Trump administration, there's not a public official in the land who had ever said anything like what the president himself has said and Todd Blanche just said about the federal courts and even the individual judges on the federal courts. That said, obviously, Todd Blanche was there and in many other instances has simply been parroting the words of the President of the United States. Todd Blanche is a classic puppet of the man in the highest office in the land.
Federal judge in Florida today just ruled that Trump's ham-handed effort to back up the truck into the Treasury to take $1.8 billion in taxpayer money and call it a settlement with his own administration, and his effort to proclaim himself and his family to have forever immunity from all tax crimes and also call it some sort of settlement. According to a federal judge in Florida today, those things are not legal settlements of any kind. They will neither be allowed to happen, nor will they be allowed to stand as effectively an attempted fraud on the court. The judge's 56-page ruling today was just super blunt. Quote, "This action was never about a party seeking judicial resolution of a legal issue or a factual dispute. The nature of the suit itself, the conduct of the parties and counsel make plain that this was an attempt to use the court to provide some legitimacy to an agreement to confer immunity to people and entities affiliated with the president, and to earmark billions of dollars from American taxpayers to redress grievances not defined in the law." An attempt to use the court to provide some legitimacy to this otherwise totally not legal scheme. The judge also referred Trump's lawyers in this matter to their respective bar associations for potential discipline in the bar or other ethics proceedings. And that includes Trump's acting attorney general, Todd Blanche. Todd Blanche, who incidentally is supposed to have his confirmation hearing this week to be the actual attorney general of the United States. With the sudden death of Republican Senator Lindsey Graham this weekend and the extended hospitalization of Republican Senator Mitch McConnell, Todd Blanche's confirmation prospects are on somewhat thin ice already. But Todd Blanche today being referred to the bar by a federal judge for this kind of misconduct on behalf of what the judge describes as one of the president's illegal schemes, well, this can't help his chances.
We are just days away from the confirmation hearing for Trump's former defense attorney and now acting attorney general, Todd Blanche, to become the 88th U.S. Attorney General. It's been a little more than 3 months since Blanche took the reins at the DOJ after Trump's last attorney general, Pam Bondi, was fired, reportedly in part due to Trump's growing frustration with the pace of prosecutions against his perceived political rivals. In just that short time, Blanche has shown his willingness to allow his former client to assert himself. as Trump has repeatedly declared to be the, quote, chief law enforcement officer of the United States. Political rivals have been targeted, journalists have been subpoenaed, and election officials have been threatened, not in the pursuit of upholding the rule of law, but upholding the rule of one man. With the DOJ expending its time and resources on these matters, it raises the concern of what real threats are being overlooked. And for those career employees working within the DOJ, the message is clear. Take part in these investigations or face the consequences. MS Now is reporting that 2 Atlanta-based FBI intelligence analysts were fired last week after refusing to participate in the Trump administration's investigation of Georgia's 2020 presidential election, according to 3 people familiar with the matter. MS Now adds, the analysts, a husband and wife, told colleagues they didn't believe the investigation was justified under FBI and Justice Department policies, the people said. And that was apparently what it took to lead to the couple getting escorted out of their offices. The FBI neither confirmed nor denied that the 2 analysts were fired. Joining us now, Melissa Murray, MS Now legal analyst, NYU law professor, and author of the book My Mother is Listening to, The U.S. Constitution, a comprehensive and annotated guide for the modern reader, and Andrew Weissman, MS Now legal analyst and author of Liar's Kingdom, How to Stop Trump's Deceit and Save America. Melissa, Andrew, thank you both for coming to the weekend. Andrew, since you are not here at the table, I will start with you. It's stories like the one coming out of Georgia, the analysts being fired. I mean, we've seen this type of story since Trump's return to the White House. But what does a story like that of analysts being fired because they won't go along with what the administration wants to do, the impact that has inside DOJ, inside the agencies that are under the Department of Justice's umbrella?
Well, I think it's because of firings like that that you have over 1,200 former Department of Justice officials who have signed a letter they're saying that they do not support and are encouraging strongly that Todd Blanche not be confirmed. He has completely undermined, as the letter states, the morale of the Department of Justice. I should say that the analysts who were fired are very much vindicated by the decision of the federal judge who just recently, this past week, quashed a subpoena in that very matter. And this was a judge who was appointed by Donald Trump, saying that Todd Blanche and his Department of Justice are engaged in an arbitrary fishing expedition. That was the term that this judge used, and saying that there is no legitimate basis to have a federal grand jury investigation. And so, you know, the people who were fired, of which they are just 2 of the latest people, are being fired for what a federal judge has found to be an improper and not engaging in an improper and illegal grand jury investigation. It seems like that's going to definitely be fodder for the upcoming confirmation hearing of Todd Blanche.
Melissa, we had you on a great episode of Clock It with me and Simone, and we talked a lot about the Supreme Court. It was our July 4th episode, and one of the things that kind of has always in my head from listening to you for years, really, is that the Supreme Court has made Donald Trump's kind of unitarian executive theory much easier than ever before.
The law now,
it is
allegedly.
So to the point of the elections that we're seeing, to the point of the DOJ doing whatever Donald Trump wants, it does seem like it is the law that the president can do whatever he wants. Is that accurate?
So we're going to find out, right? So, I mean, this certainly emboldens a president that was already asserting a very muscular vision of executive authority. The court's decision in Trump versus Slaughter, which said that the president could remove a commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission and did not have to worry about any kind of congressional constraint on that removal, there are real questions about how far that decision will go. Obviously, it doesn't extend to the Federal Reserve because it's different somehow.
But it does extend to the Election Assistance.
Well, it extends to the Election Assistance Commission, which we learned last week. It also may extend to the civil service. I mean, some of these DOJ alums who have signed on to this letter have protections under the civil service, protections that are statutorily ingrained. It is not clear how Trump versus Slaughter impacts those, and it leaves open a huge question. Like, it's not just these heads of agencies. The executive branch is composed of a lot of people, rank and file FBI members, people who work in the Department of Justice, people who work in all sorts of agencies. Are they subject to removal simply because the president does not want them there? If that is the case, then we have the prospect of one individual being able to remove huge swaths of career expertise across these agencies. That will make us certainly less effective in terms of what these agencies do, but maybe even less safe in terms of national security and intelligence and things like that.
Because they're focusing on things they weren't paying that much attention to, and therefore, what are they missing?
Well, and I do wonder, Melissa, just because you brought it up about the issue of whether civil servants are still protected, because there were also, the week before Slaughter came down, changes reportedly made to the federal merit system, which does protect civil servants and may no longer. And I guess I wonder, is that going to potentially make its way to the Supreme Court?
I think it's very likely. There's certainly the case of Maureen Comey, the former prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, the daughter of Jim Comey, who obviously has been a target of the president. She was unceremoniously removed from her place at the SDNY, and she has filed suit as well. Her argument is basically that she's protected under these statutory protections for civil servants, the Merit Protection Services. And the question going forward is this included in Slaughter? Is it encompassed in Slaughter? We don't know. And the court, to be very clear, was not particularly explicit about what the implications would be beyond the FTC and the fact that Slaughter did not apply to the Fed. So, TBD, watch this space.
Luckily, Melissa and Andrew are sticking with us. For the first time in more than 7 years, 2 Supreme Court justices will testify before Congress this week. Justices Amy Coney Barrett and Elena Kagan will appear Tuesday, as the Supreme Court has requested more than $14 million increase in its fiscal year 2027 budget for security for the 9 justices. Senior appropriators have said that they hope to keep questions tightly focused on operations and expenses of the court rather than legal matters. But the testimony comes as public confidence in the Supreme Court remains deeply divided. The scrutiny of the court has rarely been higher. Melissa Murray, Andrew Weissman are back with us. Okay, so before we pivot to the Supreme Court, Andrew, I just want to tie a bow on Todd Blanche's confirmation hearing this week. Oftentimes, lawmakers do not have the sharpest questions for these contentious hearings. What is one thing that you feel like won't be asked that should be asked of Todd Blanche?
Well, I don't know if it won't be asked, but there's a list that is just enormous. You can obviously start with the Epstein matters, the treatment of Ghislaine Maxwell, why the Department of Justice is not cooperating and turning over evidence in connection with the shootings of Alex Preddy and Renee Good, why Todd Blanche sought to indict 6 members of Congress for issuing a video comporting with the law, why he sought grand jury subpoenas that in investigations that have been quashed by federal judges. I mean, it goes on and on. Obviously, I think the slush fund will be a substantial topic, but this is one where there are so many issues raised by Todd Blanche's performance, either as Deputy Attorney General or as the acting Attorney General, that I think would in any normal times be preclusive of his serving as the Attorney General of the United States.
Melissa, one of the things that is so interesting about seeing SCOTUS going to the Hill, for me as like a history nerd, and I know for you as a big history nerd, is like it is like, oh, they are supposed to be co-equal branches because they're like going to the people with money.
Yeah.
They have their hands on. They're asking for more money for themselves. You said that the last time this happened, it was Samuel Alito. I wonder what you think about the choice of these two as the representatives. Why is it not the Chief Justice? Why is it not someone else?
So, the justices have gone to the Hill before to testify. I think they went in the wake of Bush v. Gore. They went in 2019, as you said. Justice Alito and Justice Kagan went then, and again, it was to answer questions about a budget request. And I thought it was really interesting that Justice Alito is ostensibly still on the court and Justice Kagan is still on the court, but it's only Justice Kagan is going and Justice Barrett is now stepping in for Justice Alito. I don't
think
know.
That was like a deliberate PR move?
I don't know if it's a PR move per se. I wonder if it's related to the speculation around whether or not Justice Alito may retire. He has,
and I mean, he would get tougher questions than.
Well, I think he might get tougher questions. Certainly, he has written some of the most consequential opinions of this term, like the Chief Justice, who was in the majority in many of these cases, assigned Justice Alito the decision in Louisiana versus Calais, which decimated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. He also authored the TPS decision. There are many.
Right.
So
but
maybe.
Also, is it that why would a person who's retiring be advocating
right? That's
for
what I was
2027
thinking.
budgetary?
I mean, again,
pass?
rank speculation on my part. Again, watch this space.
No, we got to read the tea leaves.
But just speculation. He's someone who sort of, I think might be willing to retire at this point. He's certainly achieved a great degree of job satisfaction in the last term, and he has a big book coming out in the fall, and the book tour is sort of timed with the start of the court's new term. Hard to say. But this question of them going before Congress, that happens quite frequently. We should remember, the court does not have the power of the purse, and this makes this so clear. They have to go hat in hand to Congress asking for these appropriations. They are asking for this appropriation increase, almost an increase of $14 million for additional security for the justices. They might also be asked, what about the lower federal courts?
Right.
Like, is there going to be a request? Because those lower federal court judges have also seen a huge uptick in threats as well.
We have breaking news, a massive rebuke from a judge in Florida, slamming President Trump's lawsuit against the IRS as a sham in a backdoor attempt to legitimize the president's $1.776 billion anti-weaponization fund and his immunity from future IRS investigations. MS Now's Fallon Gallagher joins us here on set. James, Peter, Michael are still with us. All right, walk us through this ruling, Fallon.
Yeah, so I want to take a step back first and explain what this case is and why it matters. You'll remember earlier in January, Trump sued the IRS for $10 billion, saying that his tax returns were improperly leaked. This suit raised questions from the beginning because this was Trump basically suing himself as both sides of the federal government. He's a party to both sides. Trump then moved to voluntarily dismiss this suit in May, saying that, not even actually revealing initially that he had reached a settlement, but moved to dismiss it. The judge granted his voluntary dismissal. That's this judge here, Judge Kathleen Williams. Shortly after that dismissal, we learned that there was a settlement agreement. That settlement agreement, of course, gave Trump, his family, immunity from any ongoing IRS inquiries, and it also created the anti-weaponization fund, that $1.776 billion so-called slush fund. After that happened, a group of 35 former federal judges filed a motion with this court, with Judge Kathleen Williams, asking her to revisit it, saying that there seems to have been a sham here. There might have been some collusion, wanting to...
What was the sham?
It's exactly that. Trump basically sued himself. So he is both parties of this. And in this ruling today, she's saying that there was never any adverseness here. There was no real lawsuit here. And basically what Judge Williams is saying here today is that this was a complete sham so that Trump could get this outcome with some sort of judicial legitimacy. And I want to read briefly from this because this line just really captures the whole thing. It says, this action was never about a party seeking judicial resolution of a legal issue or a factual dispute. The nature of the suit itself and the conduct of the parties and counsel from its filing make plain that this was an attempt to use the court to provide some legitimacy to an agreement to confer immunity to people and entities affiliated with the president and to earmark billions of dollars from American taxpayers to redress grievances not defined in the law. So really what she's saying, she is ripping them apart, saying that there was never any legitimacy. You conned the court, basically using the court as a vehicle for legitimacy here to reach these ends, and that this should have never been filed in the first place.
Have you ever seen anything like this before?
It is remarkable. And I will say that Judge Williams got briefing from former judges in this case who she actually asked to be amici in the case, friends of the court, to analyze the question that Fallon was just addressing, whether or not this was really a sham. The way I described this from the beginning, the way that she is describing it in this order, which I have not yet read, is simple. What Fallon is describing as a sham, this was an effort to judicially launder a settlement, to give it the sheen of legitimacy via laundering it through the court in a settlement of a case that was never a case.
Here's the part that I'm confused about. Is it the president and his personal team who are accused of the laundering, or is it the United States government who is accused of the laundering?
Really, really interesting question. And the way I would pivot on that question is to say this. If you take the administration's posture in a variety of other contexts seriously, there is no daylight between the two, because what they constantly argue in every context is that the executive branch is unitary, that it is one sole individual. So if you take them at their own word on this, Alicia, that means there's no daylight as between the two.
There's also, though, recommendations here for what should happen to these attorneys.
Yeah, so there's sanctions agreements. One of Trump's attorneys can't actually practice in the Southern District of Florida for the next year. And then there's also possible disciplinary referrals. So she is sending possible disciplinary action that gets sent to the state bars. She notably orders the clerk of this court to send her order to the state bars of both New York and D.C. Why does that matter? Todd Blanche, who has his confirmation hearing to be Attorney General on Wednesday, is barred in the state of New York. Stanley Woodward, who's the Associate Attorney General, barred in the state of D.C. Both of those bar organizations have active ethics complaints for both of those individuals right now.
Michael Feinberg, we normally talk to you as a security analyst. I want you to put on your former attorney hat for me. How could this complicate the confirmation hearing later this week? What legal questions does this bring to mind?
So I don't know that it will complicate the confirmation hearing. What it can complicate is Todd Blanche and Stanley Woodward's future lives. There will probably be some mechanism where they can still practice as Attorney General or Associate Attorney General, even with these bar inquiries. But this administration, despite how much Trump and his cohort would like, is not going to last forever. And if people like Blanche and Woodward ride roughshod over the rules of ethical behavior, the way that Trump attorneys like John Eastman or Jeff Clark did in the first administration when they tried to overthrow the 2020 election, they're going to find that they're unemployable the minute there's a transition of power. Blanche, Woodward, frankly, a lot of people at DOJ are playing a very dangerous game where they could lose their license to practice law. And once that happens, you don't only lose your ability to be the member of your sort of ersatz political guild and earn a living the way you know how. There's a real reputational cost. You know, if you're a judge and you receive a brief that someone like John Eastman, say, has taken part of, there's enough like storm and stress out there in the media that you know not to take it seriously, because this is somebody who other lawyers decided to not meet the bare minimum ethical bar to practice his profession. And I will say this as a former attorney, that is not a super high bar. Like, if you can't meet it, you know, basically there's ambulance chasers and, you know, who are doing a better job than you. Just do the bare minimum ethically that you're supposed to and you don't get in trouble. But we're in a position where the highest ranking officials at DOJ seem incapable of that.
Fallon, it is not very often that I get multiple under-the-breath wows from James Sample. Help me understand just how big of a deal this is.
So we're reading more. This is a 56-page order, so it is quite lengthy. But there is a paragraph that we just came to that could indicate that it is voiding the settlement agreement in its entirety. This says the parties are prohibited from referring to the purported settlement agreement or using, offering, admitted, admitting or citing any of its provisions in any judicial, administrative, regulatory, arbitration, or any other official proceeding as evidence of a settlement reached in this matter. Now, there's some questions about that because it's unclear if it's completely avoiding the settlement agreement terms. But to me, at least at this point, from what I've read, this indicates that they can't describe the anti-weaponization fund or the immunity deal as the result of an official settlement reached through a legal proceeding here.
Okay, 56 pages. I'm going to free you up so you can go read it. Come back to us once we have fully processed this. Thank you so much for bringing this reporting and breaking this down for us. Fallon Gallagher, as always.
On Wednesday, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche is expected to face tough questions from the Senate Judiciary Committee in his hearing to become Donald Trump's next confirmed Attorney General. It's not the first time he's appeared before this committee. He faced a public grilling for his confirmation as Deputy Attorney General, and he made one point abundantly clear then.
I couldn't agree more that politics should never play a part in the Department of Justice. It's simple. Politics will play no role. Full stop, period. Political prosecution should never happen. Period. Outside influence in the Department of Justice cannot happen. It just can't. And if it does, then that is not a righteous, that is not a just prosecution. Period. When we are prosecuting cases, civil or criminal, we have to simply do the right thing. It can't be because of politics.
Well, I've got your commitment. There will not even be a whiff of an investigation that appears to have a political motivation to it.
I commit to that.
Wow. That senator you heard at the end there is Republican Thom Tillis of North Carolina, who still sits on the committee. He, along with Senator John Cornyn of Texas, are the only two Republican members on the committee who have at least expressed some reservations about Blanche's confirmation. These are two men who are also leaving the Senate. Just recently, Tillis again brought up the same concern that he questioned Blanche about last year.
I've got a positive predisposition towards Blanche, but if there's even a whiff of a lack of independence, then that could influence my vote. But right now, I'm confident in what we see with Blanche. If we can address these distractions that have to get off the table before his confirmation, particularly the 1776 fund.
Of course, since Blanche became the acting attorney general, there have been countless actions taken, providing more than a whiff of political motivation and lack of independence coming from Trump's former defense attorney. But given that Republican lawmakers kowtowed to Trump, does it even matter? Joining us now is 18-year DOJ veteran Stacey Young. She is the founder and executive director of Justice Connection. And former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance, MS Now legal analyst and professor at the University of Alabama School of Law. Thank you both for coming to the weekend. Joyce, let me start with you. With the Todd Blanche confirmation hearings kicking off this week, what are you expecting to come out of this?
Well, I think we all are concerned that Blanche will be confirmed despite the very obvious reasons that he shouldn't be. And look, Jonathan, I was at DOJ for 25 years. I was hired during a Republican administration. The Justice Department that I served in and that Todd Blanche served in was not a political place. He made those promises during his confirmation hearing to be the deputy. He said he wouldn't let political considerations enter the calculation at his Justice Department. And then he did exactly the opposite of that. And look, it's so bad that just yesterday there was reporting that the White House had hauled Kash Patel in to order him to open an investigation involving the New York Times reporting on the plane that the president has been flying in, provided by a foreign country. That's not how the Justice Department should operate. It's concerning that Senator Tillis, even in late June, said he had a lean toward Blanche. That suggests that perhaps these senators who should be persuadable may not be. So the important thing this week will be watching how Blanche answers specific questions. Why did he sign off not just on the slush fund that we've talked about so much that appears to be off the table now, but that incredible document that gave Trump and his family forgiveness for past tax violations, seemed to insulate them from future investigation? as well as the revenge docket he's overseen, the Comey prosecution and others, and on into the way the Epstein files release was mishandled, protecting predators, protecting perpetrators, and disclosing information about survivors. Blanche has a lot to answer for, and he should not be confirmed.
Stacey, you are the founder and executive director of Justice Connection, and a letter came out, 1,200 former DOJ officials urging the Senate to reject Blanche, just as Joyce Vance said just there. I'm going to read a little from the letter. Blanche has fired or overseen the firings of hundreds of these employees, usually without notice and for improper, unlawful reasons. Some were terminated for having worked on cases the president didn't like, for being relatives of the president's foes, for adjudicating immigration cases in accordance with due process, for declining to initiate vindictive prosecutions, or for refusing to lie in court. These terminations violate the very civil service statutes designed to prevent corruption and political purges. Well, Stacey, when you put it like that, it doesn't sound too great. So what are you hearing from these folks? And frankly, do they really believe that this Senate, who followed Donald Trump at his every whim, is really going to stand up on this issue here?
There's a lot of concerns about the future of the civil service at the Justice Department. More than 16,000 career employees have left already. That represents a quarter of all of the attorneys in the Justice Department. And Todd Blanche has overseen nearly all of them. He's been responsible for just about all of them. He himself has personally fired DOJ employees for flagrantly illegal reasons. And the attacks on the department need to stop. As anyone who's ever worked there knows, the career workforce is the backbone of Justice Department. It represents 99% of the workforce. They're the ones who do the work. They're the ones who keep our country safe by prosecuting violent crime, by investigating drug trafficking, by countering terrorism and espionage. They keep us prosperous by enforcing antitrust laws. They protect our fundamental freedoms by upholding civil rights laws. That they keep our elected officials honest by upholding public corruption laws. And the workforce is being decimated. This needs to stop. Todd Blanche took an oath to uphold the Constitution, not to be loyal to the president. And until we see a course correction at the Department of Justice, its future is in danger.
Joyce, I do want to get back to the Thom Tillis of this all, because that statement that we read, that he has a positive predisposition towards Blanche, but that even if there's a whiff of a lack of independence, that would influence my vote.
The whiff's there.
Exactly. I mean, how many times have we already heard Todd Blanche cross those red lines when it comes to independence and the way that he views his relationship with Donald Trump, saying explicitly that he takes his directives from the president? I mean, when we're looking at the numbers here, I believe that Blanche is able to lose up to 3 votes from Republicans, and with a tie-breaking vote from J.D. Vance still get confirmed. Lindsey Graham is no longer voting. We don't know yet if Mitch McConnell is going to be showing up to work this week. Is there going to be one GOP lawmaker, at least anyone that you have sort of an inkling of, that you think is going to vote against him? Because I don't think it's going to be Thom Tillis.
You know, this is a difficult question. It should not be a difficult question. The Senate is full of lawyers, people who can look at the way Todd Blanche has behaved and know that it's wrong. And so the real question, I suppose, that we're discussing is whether any of them will find the courage in the moment to do the right thing. And unfortunately, and as painful as it is to say this, I think it's unlikely that they will, right? This nomination would not be coming to the floor if there was a belief that some of these senators were put off by the way that Blanche has behaved. You know, remember, this is Todd Blanche who actually responded to a question by saying that if the president didn't pick him, he would say, "I love you, sir." Just the level of kowtowing to this president is unbelievable. This is Donald Trump's former defense lawyer, still acting in ways that inexplicably protect this president. This Senate was part of the Congress that passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act, requiring disclosures that have not been made. Todd Blanche played the leading role in preventing those disclosures from happening. In a normal world, that would be enough to prevent his confirmation.
Stacey Young and Joyce Vance, thank you so much for breaking that all down for us.
With me now is MS Now congressional reporter Michael Schnell, along with Jennifer Freeman, senior counsel at Marsh Law Firm, child sex abuse attorney who represents Epstein survivors. Jennifer, just pull back the curtain for us. Tell us what your clients are feeling ahead of this confirmation hearing.
A lot of frustration, Alicia, and it's good to be with you. I really am they're very concerned that this confirmation hearing is going forward, and we want answers to questions like, what did they do to comply with the act? There was a complete illusion of transparency from the outset with the grand jury, with a request by Todd Blanche to release the grand jury documents when he knew full well that that was not likely to succeed. And then when the Epstein Files Transparency Act passed, there was an illusion of compliance with the act, with the over-redaction of not failure to redact victim identifying information and the over-redaction of those who shouldn't have been redacted, like the co-conspirators, and the under-redaction of those who are the survivors and their identifying information. So survivors really want answers.
I am sure they do. Michael, we know there are Republican senators who are not a firm yes here on Blanche. Do we know what type of promises, commitments, concessions they are looking to get from him?
Yeah, Alicia, I think I could cover a lot of ground, including Epstein. Todd Blanche was, of course, the one who had met with Ghislaine Maxwell before that prison transfer. Also worth noting that when former Attorney General Pam Bondi had spoken to the House Oversight Committee behind closed doors, she testified that it was Todd Blanche who was in charge of the rollout of the Epstein files. And as was noted, there were issues with that. So there could be some interesting clarity on the Epstein front. There could also be wanting for more information on that anti-weaponization fund, maybe more of a firm understanding from Todd Blanche that it is indeed dead. He has, of course, said it in the past, but some lawmakers have said that just words are not enough. They want it written down in paper or another way. There could also be some questions about that IRS settlement, particularly with a judge saying that it was suspect today. So in light of that news, that's an area of concern. And then just the independence of the person, like an attorney general. Todd Blanche, it is not lost on Republicans that he was formerly the president's personal attorney, and there are a number of Republicans who want to ensure that he is now going to be an independent attorney general and not be acting as the president's attorney. We've heard this from somebody like Bill Cassidy, the Republican from Louisiana. We've also heard it from Tom Tillis and John Cornyn. They are two in particularly important Republicans here because they sit on the Senate Judiciary Committee, so they'll have an opportunity to actually question Todd Blanche when he faces senators on Wednesday. So certainly a lot of areas that folks are going to want to hear about, and those questions are going to finally come on Wednesday.
I think about the billboards that are going up, Jennifer, in North Carolina for Tillis, in Texas for Cornyn, in Louisiana for Kennedy. I think we all understand how these pressure campaigns are structured, right? That folks who care about this, there's a huge community of people all across this country who do feel that the Epstein survivors have been failed by multiple governments, most recently by the Trump administration. They want to see accountability. The hope is they pick up the phone, they call their U.S. senator and say, hey, we're finally at an inflection point where you have the power to do something about this and hold the person accountable, both who has overseen the release of these files and who in his future post would have the ability to do that. Have the survivors you've spoken with received any commitments from these Republican senators that they plan to really press Blanche on his handling of the Epstein files or on the role he played in getting Ghislaine Maxwell transferred?
I haven't heard of any serious commitments, but I have heard that they're listening. And I think that's a very important piece here. The other piece I wanted to mention, because no one really talks about it, is it's a whole nother class of Epstein survivors that no one ever considers. And those are the survivors, the victims of child pornography. The government, Todd Blanche and others, have failed those people also who have not even been identified. We know there are hundreds of thousands of videos, but we don't know who they are. So how can they have a voice if they're not even identified?
Jennifer, I've only got about 30 seconds left, but I just wonder emotionally just how challenging it has been for the survivors that you speak with on a regular basis. There have been so many iterations of this road to accountability.
It's repeatedly triggering for many of them to continue to face these battles, but I have to give them so much credit. They're strong, they're brave, they're courageous, and they're committed to doing the very best they can to serve their interests and the interests of the American public for transparency and accountability, because that's what's needed here.